The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Private Rachel Hayes stood at the base of the 40-foot concrete wall that had broken the spirits of countless soldiers before her. At exactly 6:30 a.m., she could hear the boots of her fellow recruits marching toward the obstacle course, but her eyes remained fixed on the smooth, gray surface that rose like a mountain before her. Rachel was small, barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, with arms that looked like twigs compared to the muscular frames of her male counterparts. When she had first arrived at Fort Blackstone 3 months ago, the other recruits had taken one look at her and assumed she would wash out within weeks. Even now, after proving herself in combat training and academic studies, there was still one challenge that seemed impossible for someone of her size and build. Colonel James Whitmore stood 30 feet away, checking his stopwatch with the practiced precision of a man who had overseen thousands of training exercises. His weathered face showed no emotion, but Rachel had learned to read the subtle signs of his disapproval. The way he pressed his lips together when she struggled with the rope climb. The slight shake of his head when she needed help getting over the 8-foot wall during group exercises. The other recruits began gathering around the base of the wall, some stretching their arms and shoulders in preparation for their attempts. Marcus Thompson, a 6'2" former college football player, cracked his knuckles confidently. He had already scaled this wall twice, both times in under 30 seconds, earning him praise from the colonel and respect from their peers. Standing next to Marcus was Jake Coleman, whose muscular frame and years of rock climbing experience had made him a natural at every climbing challenge they had faced. He spoke quietly with the others, but Rachel caught fragments of their conversation. They were making bets on how long it would take her to give up, how many attempts she would need before admitting defeat. Rachel had been dreading this day for weeks. The wall climb was the final test of their basic training, the one obstacle that determined whether they would advance to specialized military training or be transferred to desk jobs. Every soldier was required to scale the wall in under 2 minutes to pass, but that was just the minimum standard. The real measure of success was how quickly you could complete the climb, and that determined your placement in advanced units. She had tried this wall dozens of times over the past month, always during off hours when fewer people would witness her failures. Her best time had been 3 minutes and 47 seconds, achieved only after multiple attempts left her arms shaking and her confidence shattered. Even that time was barely half the speed of the average male recruit. Colonel Whitmore called for attention, his voice carrying across the training ground with military authority. Today marks your final basic training assessment. Each of you will attempt to scale the obstacle wall. Minimum passing time is 2 minutes. Those who fail to meet this standard will be reassigned to non-combat roles. Rachel felt her stomach clench as the colonel's eyes swept across the group of recruits. When his gaze landed on her, she saw something that made her heart sink. It was not the look of someone who expected her to succeed. It was the look of someone who was already planning her reassignment. Marcus stepped forward first, rolling his shoulders and approaching the wall with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his abilities. The wall was designed to be climbed without equipment, relying purely on upper body strength and technique. Small handholds and footholds had been carved into the concrete at irregular intervals, but they were positioned to challenge even experienced climbers. The colonel raised his stopwatch. "Thompson, you may begin." Marcus launched himself at the wall with explosive power, his large hands gripping the holds with certainty. He moved up the vertical surface like it was a ladder, each movement calculated and efficient. His feet found purchase on tiny ledges that seemed impossible to use, while his arms pulled his body upward with mechanical precision. Rachel watched as Marcus reached the top in 26 seconds, earning approving nods from the colonel and cheers from some of the other recruits. He rappelled down the backside of the wall using the safety rope, landing with a satisfied grin on his face. Jake went next, his climbing experience evident in every move. He took a different route up the wall, using holds that Marcus had ignored, flowing from one position to the next with the grace of someone who understood how to work with the rock rather than against it. His time was 23 seconds, even faster than Marcus. One by one, the other recruits attempted the wall. Most completed the climb in times ranging from 28 to 55 seconds. A few struggled, taking over a minute, but they all managed to reach the top within the 2-minute requirement. With each successful climb, Rachel felt the weight of expectation growing heavier on her shoulders. Finally, she was the only recruit left at the base of the wall. The others had formed a loose semicircle behind her, some genuinely hoping she would succeed, others clearly expecting to witness her failure. Colonel Whitmore approached her, his expression unreadable. "Hayes," he said, his voice lacking the enthusiasm he had shown for the other recruits. "You understand what is required." Rachel nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She stepped up to the wall and placed her hands on the first set of holds, feeling the rough concrete against her palms. The surface was already warm from the morning sun, and she could see chalk marks left by the previous climbers. Colonel Whitmore raised his stopwatch. "You may begin when ready." Rachel took a deep breath and began her ascent. She had studied this wall for weeks, memorizing every hold, every possible route to the top. Her small frame, which everyone saw as a disadvantage, actually allowed her to use holds that were too small or awkwardly positioned for larger climbers. But as she moved up the wall, she could feel her arms beginning to shake with the effort. Her technique was good, but her lack of upper body strength meant that every move required maximum effort. By the time she was halfway up the wall, her muscles were burning and her breathing had become labored. She could hear whispered comments from below, though she tried to block them out. Someone mentioned that she was taking too long. Another voice suggested that she should give up before she hurt herself. The voices created a background noise of doubt that made it even harder to focus on her climbing. At the 30-foot mark, Rachel encountered the section of the wall that had always been her downfall. There was a gap between holds that required a dynamic move, throwing her body upward to catch a hold that was just barely within reach. It was a move that required explosive power, something she had never possessed in abundance. She had failed at this exact spot during every previous attempt. Her arms would give out, or she would miss the hold entirely, forcing her to either climb back down or fall onto the safety mat below. As she paused at this crucial point, Rachel could feel the eyes of everyone watching her, waiting for her inevitable failure. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the knowledge that this was her final chance, or maybe it was the accumulated frustration of months of being underestimated. Instead of the usual fear and doubt, she felt a calm determination settling over her. Rachel looked up at the hold she needed to reach, calculating the distance and the angle. She had attempted this move dozens of times, always approaching it the same way that the larger recruits did. But suddenly, she realized that she had been trying to climb like someone else instead of figuring out how to use her own strengths. Instead of making the dynamic leap that the move seemed to require, Rachel repositioned herself on the wall. She found a small foothold that the others had ignored, one that was positioned perfectly for someone of her height. Using this new position, she could reach the crucial handhold without needing to make a desperate lunge. The hold was still challenging to use, requiring her to compress her body against the wall and rely on her core strength rather than just her arms. But this was something she could do. Months of training had given her excellent body control and balance, even if she lacked raw power. Rachel made the move smoothly, flowing from one position to the next without the explosive effort that had always defeated her before. She could hear surprised murmurs from below as she continued climbing, moving faster now that she had passed the obstacle that had always stopped her. The final section of the wall flew by as Rachel found a rhythm that worked for her body and her abilities. She wasn't climbing like Marcus or Jake, with brute force and athletic power. Instead, she was climbing like herself, using technique and intelligence to overcome physical limitations. When her hand touched the top of the wall at exactly 1 minute and 18 seconds, Rachel almost couldn't believe it. She had not only passed the minimum requirement, she had actually posted a competitive time. But even more surprising was what happened next. Colonel Whitmore was staring at his stopwatch with an expression of disbelief. He looked up at Rachel, then back at the stopwatch, then called out to his assistant. "Sergeant Miller, confirm this time." Sergeant Miller checked his own stopwatch and nodded. 1 minute 18 seconds, sir. But Rachel was not finished. As she prepared to rappel down the back of the wall, something made her pause. Maybe it was the adrenaline coursing through her system, or maybe it was the desire to prove that her success had not been a fluke. Instead of descending, she moved to a different section of the wall. "Hayes, what are you doing?" Colonel Whitmore called up to her. "Requesting permission to attempt the wall again, sir," Rachel called back. There was a moment of confused silence from the group below. No one had ever asked to climb the wall twice on testing day. Most recruits were happy to complete one successful attempt and move on. Colonel Whitmore looked puzzled but nodded. "Permission granted. Descend and prepare for your second attempt." Rachel rappelled down and walked back to the base of the wall. This time, there were no whispered comments or betting on her failure. The other recruits watched with genuine curiosity as she prepared for her second climb. She approached the wall with confidence now, knowing that she had already proven she could reach the top. But more importantly, she had learned something about herself and about how to use her unique strengths rather than trying to compensate for her perceived weaknesses. Colonel Whitmore raised his stopwatch again. "Hayes, second attempt. Begin when ready." This time, Rachel moved up the wall with fluid efficiency. She used the same route she had discovered during her first climb, but now she moved with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Every hold, every foot placement, every transition was executed with precision. She reached the halfway point in 35 seconds, significantly faster than her first attempt. The section that had always defeated her passed smoothly as she used her new technique, compressing against the wall and using her body position to her advantage. But what happened in the final section of the wall was something that surprised everyone, including Rachel herself. As she approached the top, she found a sequence of holds that allowed her to move with incredible speed. Her small hands could grip holds that were too awkward for larger climbers, and her light weight meant that she needed less strength to pull herself from one position to the next. She flowed up the final 20 feet of the wall like water flowing uphill, each move setting up the next in a continuous chain of motion. Her feet barely seemed to touch the holds before pushing off to the next position. Her hands moved from grip to grip with the confidence of someone who had found their perfect element. When Rachel touched the top of the wall for the second time, Colonel Whitmore stared at his stopwatch in stunned silence. The training ground had gone completely quiet, with everyone waiting to hear the result. 18 seconds, the colonel announced, his voice carrying a note of amazement that Rachel had never heard from him before. The other recruits erupted in cheers and applause. Even Marcus and Jake, who had been skeptical of her abilities, were clapping enthusiastically. 18 seconds was not just a good time for someone of Rachel's size and build. It was a genuinely impressive time by any standard, faster than most of the male recruits had managed. As Rachel rappelled down the wall for the final time, she was greeted by her fellow recruits with congratulations and respect. But more importantly, she saw a change in Colonel Whitmore's expression. The doubt and resignation were gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine admiration. Colonel Whitmore approached her as she unclipped from the rappelling rope. "Hayes, that was extraordinary climbing. How did you find that route?" Rachel thought for a moment before answering. "Sir, I realized I was trying to climb the wall the same way everyone else does, instead of figuring out the way that worked best for me. Once I stopped trying to be something I'm not, I could focus on using what I actually have." The colonel nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You've learned something important today, Hayes, something that goes well beyond climbing walls." Over the following weeks, word of Rachel's wall climb spread throughout Fort Blackstone. The story grew in the telling, with some versions claiming she had climbed the wall in 15 seconds, others insisting it was even faster. But the recruits who had been there knew the truth, and they remembered not just the time but the transformation they had witnessed. Rachel's success on the wall changed how people viewed her, but more importantly, it changed how she viewed herself. She stopped apologizing for her size and started leveraging her strengths. In combat training, Her agility and precision made her formidable in close-quarters situations. In academic studies, her analytical mind helped her excel at strategy and tactics. Colonel Whitmore began using Rachel as an example in his lectures to new recruits. He would tell them about the soldier who had been written off as too small and too weak, but who had ultimately achieved something that none of the bigger, stronger recruits had managed. The lesson was always the same. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to be anyone else. 6 months later, when Rachel was selected for advanced special operations training, Colonel Whitmore pulled her aside for a final conversation. "Hayes, I owe you an apology. When I first saw you, I made assumptions based on what I thought I knew about physical requirements and capabilities. You proved me wrong in the best possible way." Rachel smiled, remembering the scared recruit who had stood at the base of that wall, convinced she would fail. "Sir, you taught me something important too. You showed me that respect has to be earned, and that the best way to earn it is through actions, not words." Years later, when Rachel had become an instructor herself, she would often bring new recruits to that same wall. She would tell them the story of her 18-second climb, but the real lesson was always about finding your own path to success. The wall still stood at Fort Blackstone, 40 feet of concrete that continued to challenge new generations of soldiers. But now it also served as a reminder that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when you stop trying to be someone else and start being the best version of yourself. Rachel's 18-second climb became legendary not because of the time itself, but because of what it represented. It was proof that strength comes in many forms, that technique can overcome raw power, and that the biggest obstacles are often the ones we create in our own minds. The colonel who had once doubted her strength had learned to see strength in new ways. And the recruit who had been dismissed as too small had learned that size is just one measurement of a person's capabilities, and often not the most important one. On quiet mornings, when the training ground was empty and the wall cast its long shadow across the concrete, you could still see chalk marks from countless climbers who had attempted to reach the top. But somewhere among those marks, invisible but permanent, was the memory of 18 seconds that changed everything for one small soldier who refused to accept limitations that others tried to place on her.